A millionaire went undercover to surprise his girlfriend, but what he witnessed wasn't a surprise. It was the scene that shattered his life, and it all began with the weight of a small velvet box in his pocket. His thumb traced the velvety texture, a repetitive gesture to anchor himself in reality as his mind was already sinking. The weight didn't come from the diamond, but from the doubt it carried. As he watched Claire from across the room, the sound of her laugh, as crisp as the champagne they were drinking, cut through the hall. That sound used to warm him. Now, it was just a cold noise, the clinking of glass against glass, announcing something was broken. The question that had haunted him for months hammered in his mind, cold and relentless, turning the ring in his pocket into a final test. Does she love me? Or does she love what I can give her? James knew with a devastating certainty that he needed the answer before taking the next step, even if the truth would leave him with absolutely nothing. Before James goes undercover and the truth begins to exact its price, a quick question. What city or country are you watching this story from about the search for real love? Comment below. And if you also believe that true wealth isn't about what we have, but about being loved for who we truly are, then become a part of this community. Subscribe now and hit the bell, because the revelation awaiting James will change everything he thinks he knows about love. Done? Great. Now let's get back to that dangerous decision, to the moment James decided to erase himself so he could finally be seen. To the outside world, James and Claire's relationship wasn't just perfect. It was a masterpiece curated for maximum admiration. Every public appearance was a flawless performance, from dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants where the wine was older than most nations, to weekend getaways on private jets to islands that money made exclusive. Their photos graced society columns and social media feeds, gathering thousands of likes that served as applause for a successful play. James, more than anyone, had been the architect of this perfection. He saw Claire as the final piece of his empire, the most beautiful and elegant acquisition to complete the picture of a victorious life. And she, in turn, played the part with unnerving mastery. Her admiring gaze in public was so convincing that even he sometimes allowed himself to believe it. But for a split second, when the cameras turned away, her smile would falter before being perfectly put back in place. A detail as quick as a camera shutter, invisible to almost everyone. In the silent moments, however, the facade crumbled. It was in the quiet of the limousine after a night of timed smiles that James's doubt found room to breathe. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It was empty. It was in those moments that he realized her perfect laugh held no warmth. It was a cold sound, the clinking of a flawless but hollow crystal. Their intimacy felt scripted, every gesture a repetition of something from a movie. The impending marriage proposal, symbolized by the ring that now weighed in his pocket, turned this silent doubt into a deafening alarm. To formalize their union would mean making the performance permanent. The thought terrified him. A millionaire accustomed to doing due diligence before any acquisition realized with a chill that he was about to make the biggest investment of his life without any idea of the asset's authenticity. That was how the most insane and desperate idea of his life was born. It wasn't a whim, but a visceral need to find the truth. In his world of paid assistants and friends who benefited from his generosity, truth had become the rarest and most inaccessible luxury item. He couldn't just ask. He needed to see. He would strip himself of everything, the name, the suit, the aura of power, to become Leo, an invisible intern in his own company. He was about to burn his perfect world to the ground in the hope of finding something real in the ashes. The transformation was more than a simple change of clothes. In the reflection of a mirror in the modest apartment he'd rented for the mission, James vanished, and Leo emerged. The tailored wool suit, cut to command respect, was replaced by a polyester shirt that felt scratchy against his skin and a pair of shapeless khaki pants. The cheap glasses didn't just hide his eyes, they seemed to change his posture, curving his shoulders inward as if apologizing for his own existence. For the first time in over a decade, he felt anonymous. And as he crossed the marble lobby of his own building, that anonymity became a palpable invisibility. He remembered walking through that same lobby with Claire just a week before. Security guards straightened up, whispers died down, and her look was one of pure pride. The memory of that pride was now a knife twisting in his chest. The same people who would rush to hold the door or lower their heads for Mr. Alistair now brushed past him, bumping his shoulder without an apology. He was adjusting the glasses that kept slipping down his nose when he saw her. Claire was walking down the main hall as if she owned the place, flanked by two executives who were laughing at something she said. Leo's heart pounded. He stood still, an observer in his own universe, waiting for the moment of contact. Then, it happened. The group approached, and her eyes met his. In that instant, an irrational part of James hoped for something, a flicker of recognition, a hesitation, any sign that her soul recognized his. There was nothing. Her gaze passed over him with an empty, impersonal politeness. There was no contempt, which would have almost been a comfort. There was just absolute indifference. James felt the air leave his lungs in a silent rush, as if he'd taken an invisible punch to the gut. For a second, he had to lean against the cold hallway wall to steady his legs, the world spinning slowly. The group walked past, and her laugh echoed behind him. That look was the first needle of truth piercing the bubble of his hope. It was the first dose of the poison he had chosen to drink, and the taste was more bitter than he could have ever prepared for. The days as Leo blurred into a routine of invisibility. He learned the names of employees he never knew existed, the exact temperature of the executive's coffee, and the monotonous hum of the office as seen from the bottom. Being a ghost in his own empire gave him a terrifying perspective. He realized how little people truly looked at one another. The first concrete proof came in the break room. Leo was refilling the coffee machine when he heard Claire's voice, followed by the laughter of two of her colleagues. He froze. He felt the warmth of the coffee maker against his back, but a coldness spread through his chest. Each beat of his heart seemed to echo the coffee grinder, a mechanical, anxious sound, and he focused on keeping his hands from shaking. "Speaking of new faces, what do you think of the new intern, Leo?" one of the colleagues asked. Claire's voice, laced with condescending amusement, replied, "Oh, the guy with the glasses. He seems a bit lost, don't you think? Harmless. A little goofy, maybe, but he tries." The other colleague laughed and added, "At least the boss is the opposite. I heard the year-end bonuses are going to be incredible. Mr. Alistair really knows how to take care of the right people." Goofy and lost on one side, the opposite on the other. The words dug into James, forcing him to hear his own powerful identity being used to diminish his vulnerable one. He was, in the same breath, the hero and the nobody of their conversation. It was then that Claire turned, and her eyes met his. She gave him a smile, not the radiant smile from the photos, but a polite, mechanical smile, a social twitch that didn't come close to her eyes. He remembered a smile she had given him months ago, on a rainy night when their car broke down. That smile was real, imperfect. This one, in the break room, was an empty shell. The women left, leaving Leo alone with the hum of the machine. The indifference of their first encounter had been a clean wound. This was different. The pity, the casual contempt, the devastating irony, this was a slow poison, beginning to spread through his veins. And he knew with a terrible certainty that the whole truth would be even more lethal. The following days were a torture of proximity. As Leo, James was assigned to support Claire's department, which meant he was constantly in her orbit, ever present, ever invisible. He learned to master the art of non-existence, moving along the edges of rooms, becoming part of the furniture. This proximity exposed him to increasingly lethal doses of the truth. The moment that began his free fall happened near a meeting room. He was outside when he heard her voice through the half-open door, speaking on the phone, stripped of all corporate formality. He stopped to listen. "No, you won't believe it. He's even worse up close," Claire said, followed by a laugh. "The intern, Leo. Today he dropped a stack of papers right in front of me. It's obvious he's trying to compensate for something, but he just comes off as desperate. Every word was a cut. James felt a burning in his face, a humiliation so intense it was almost physical. He looked down and saw that the papers in his hands were shaking. He gripped them tightly, the edge of a sheet cutting his finger, a tiny, sharp pain that anchored him to the greater agony of the moment. "And the way he looks," Claire continued. "He looks at me like a stray dog in the rain. You know, it's almost funny." Early on, James once confessed to me that he felt a little lost in the world before he met me. It's that same look, but coming from that guy, it's just pathetic. The betrayal of that confidence hit him like a wave, stealing the air from his lungs. She wasn't just mocking a disguise. She was desecrating a memory, turning his vulnerability into a joke. A whirlwind of rage surged in his throat, and he took a step toward the door, his body coiled to spring. But then he stopped. A cold clarity cut through the red haze of his anger. If he confronted her now, she would play the victim. The old James Alistair would have kicked down that door. He would have yelled, fired, destroyed. But the old James was a fool who settled for loud victories. Leo, the ghost, was wiser. Leo knew that truth isn't won with power, but observed in silence. With a monumental effort, he backed away. He swallowed his rage, letting it solidify into a cold resolution in his stomach. He wouldn't confront her. He would keep watching. He would become the mirror that reflected her true soul, even if the process shattered him into 1,000 pieces. The end of the afternoon brought an air of exhaustion to the office. Leo was organizing his desk, his body aching, and saw Claire walk past, announcing she had to stay late, tied up on a project with her manager, Mark. As she passed Leo, she shot him a look of weary superiority. Leo was one of the last to leave. The cold Chicago night greeted him, and he decided to stop at the small Italian cafe on the corner, the same one where, a year ago, he and Claire had taken shelter from a storm, laughing and sharing a tiramisu, the place he associated with the beginning of their magic. He sat by the window, using Leo's invisibility to watch the world. That's when he saw them leave the building. It wasn't a stressed-out Claire who emerged, but a relaxed Claire, laughing alongside Mark. Their body language screamed intimacy. They stopped under a streetlight, not as colleagues, but as accomplices. Time seemed to slow down. The sound of traffic became a distant hum. James saw their shared laugh, saw her hand come up to brush a strand of hair from his face, a gesture of tender ownership. And then, the kiss. Deliberate, deep, and hungry. A lover's kiss. And what broke James inside wasn't the kiss itself, but the slight smile that formed on her lips during the kiss, a sign of familiar contentment and comfort that he, in all his years with her, had never received. At that exact moment, as if by some macabre joke of fate, his pocket vibrated. With numb hands, he took out his phone. The screen lit up, illuminating her name, Claire. He opened the message. The words appeared, each one a final, precise stab. "Working late, my love. Don't wait up. Missing you, your Claire." The world rushed back in with sudden violence. The free fall was over. He wasn't falling anymore. He had shattered on the ground of the place where their love story had begun. Reality was a million shards of glass around him, and he was bleeding in the middle of it all. The ride back to his apartment was a blur. The door to his penthouse opened to a vast, oppressive silence. The luxury that surrounded him, the art on the walls, the panoramic view, it all seemed to mock him, monuments to a successful life that had been revealed as hollow. He took out the small velvet box. On the marble countertop, the diamond didn't shine with promise. It glittered like a perfectly frozen tear. Staring at that stone, the pain of betrayal mingled with a more terrible question. The fault wasn't only hers. What kind of man needs to lie to test love? The question echoed in his soul. He had built a relationship like a portfolio, assessing appearances, status. He never showed vulnerability. He showed infallibility. Her betrayal was unforgivable, but the foundation she had betrayed was already rotten. He had treated her as his most prized acquisition, and she had treated him like a vault. This realization didn't lessen the pain, but deepened it. And in the midst of this pain, self-pity transformed into a cold, crystalline rage. The morning was ending. The turning point had come. With a calmness he hadn't felt in months, he picked up his phone. He opened Claire's contact, looked at her smiling photo, and pressed block. He did the same on every social network, severing each digital cord that connected him to the lie. Then, he sat at his laptop. The email to HR was short and final. Subject: End of internship, Leo C. As of this date, Leo's internship has been terminated. Send. With that click, Leo, the symbol of his vulnerability, died. And in his place, a new James Alistair began to take shape. Not the passionate fool, not the furious victim, but a man who had seen the abyss. He stood up and looked one last time at the ring on the marble. With his fingertip, he closed the lid of the box with a soft but definitive click. The sound was quiet, but to him it was the sound of a vault door locking forever. He didn't throw the ring away. He just sentenced it to darkness for now. Dignity would be his weapon. And the game, which had been hers until now, was about to have new rules. The next morning, James returned to the office. The expensive suit had never felt more like armor, a disguise of power hiding the ruins within. People went back to lowering their eyes as he passed, but he felt an overwhelming loneliness. He was once again the center of the universe, and he had never felt so invisible. Seeking refuge, he stopped in an empty hallway, looking out at the cold city through a pane of glass. It was there that a woman from the cleaning crew finished her work. Her name tag read Julia. He noticed her vaguely, the way he noticed the flowers being changed in the hallway, part of the functional, anonymous machinery that kept his world polished. The thought filled him with shame. She approached quietly. There was a small white scar above her eyebrow, the mark of a story he could never imagine, and tired lines around her eyes, which nonetheless regarded him with kindness. In her hand, she held out a simple styrofoam cup with steam rising from it. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said in a soft voice. James, surprised, just stared at her. She placed the coffee in his hand. "The world can be a very cold place, sir," she said, looking him in the eye. "Don't let it freeze you on the inside." The warmth of the cup spread through his cold hand, a sensation so simple and yet so profoundly comforting. It was the opposite of the cold diamond, the cold rage, the cold indifference from Claire. It was warmth, genuine and asking for nothing in return. Julia gave him a small smile, one that reached her tired eyes, and quietly retreated, leaving him with that small beacon of warmth in his hands. That gesture, from someone his world had taught him to ignore, was the first real human connection he had felt in years, and it made him question everything he thought he knew about value. 3 days of absolute silence passed. On Wednesday, James sent a message. "Dinner at the Sterling, 8 p.m. Be there." The tone was a summons. Intrigued, Claire accepted, assuming he was ready to apologize. She found him at the center table of the restaurant. He didn't look sorry. He looked dangerously calm. On the table was a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, a wine he knew she detested. It was the first sign that the rules of the game had changed. "I haven't forgotten anything, Claire." "Sit down," he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He let her fill the silence with excuses about work, watching her like a biologist studying a specimen. Then, he placed a brown envelope on the white linen tablecloth. "The truth," he answered her look. "I think it's about time you looked at it." Her hands trembled as she saw the photos, the kisses, the messages. The color drained from Claire's face, her mask of sophistication disintegrating. She looked up, searching for an explosion, but found only his icy calm. And that broke her. Shame turned to fury. "A disguise?" she spat, her voice a venomous hiss. "You dressed up like a nobody to spy on me? How pathetic! You never wanted a partner, James. You wanted an accessory that matched your cars. And I was the best accessory you ever had. At least Mark talked to the woman, not the trophy." Her words, the twisted truth he had already confronted, hit him, but didn't shake him. He absorbed them in silence. He waited for her to finish and, in the same low, cutting voice, delivered his verdict. "It's over, Claire." He paused. "Oh, and by the way, as of tomorrow, Mark no longer works at my company." He then took the blue velvet box from his pocket, now looking like a small casket, and slid it gently across the table to her. He didn't open it. "This was for you. But I think in the end, you'll have more use for the photos than for the promise." James stood, left a few bills on the table, and turned away. He walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving her at the center of the stage he had set. For an instant, the fury on her face dissolved, giving way to a flash of panic and desolation, her eyes fixed on the velvet box. It was the look of someone who had lost not just a millionaire, but the one chance at something that could have been real if she hadn't destroyed it herself. Then the mask of anger returned, but it was too late. In the silence of his car, James didn't feel the euphoria of victory, but an exhausted relief. The weight of months of lies and pain was finally lifting from his shoulders. It was over. He had reclaimed his dignity, but now he faced a frightening question. What comes after the end of the world you knew? It was in this moment of silence that his phone vibrated. The text was from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Julia from the cleaning staff. I got your number from the office contact list. I hope you don't mind. I know it's not my place, but you seemed so down earlier today. I just wanted to know if you're okay, sir. Sorry to bother you." The sincerity of the message was a shock, a genuine concern, from someone with nothing to gain. For an instant, the cynicism of the old James Alistair surfaced. A cleaning lady? The urge to ignore it, to see it as an oddity, was strong. It was the safe path of his old world. But he forced himself to stop. That world had led him to disaster. Maybe the right path was, for the first time, the most unexpected one. A small smile, the first genuine one in a long time, touched his lips. The new James saw the message as a sign. He remembered the warmth of the coffee cup and her words. "Don't let the world freeze you on the inside." While he had been waging war in luxury restaurants, true healing lay in the simplicity of a kind gesture. He picked up his phone and began to type. "Thank you, Julia. I'm better now. You said something about the world being cold. Would you be open to getting coffee sometime to tell me more about how not to freeze in it?" He sent the message. With that act, he wasn't just answering a kind question. He was taking the first step out of the ruins of his past and toward a future that was uncertain, but for the first time, potentially real. They met in a simple coffee shop that smelled of roasted coffee, light years away from the cold marble of the Sterling. Outside, a summer rain was falling, and James felt as if it were somehow washing his soul. As they talked, he found himself noticing the details the old James would never have seen: the small scar above her eyebrow, the silver strands in her hair. He realized that true beauty wasn't in the absence of flaws, but in the story each imperfection told. "So," he began, "what did you mean by 'don't let the world freeze you'?" She thought for a moment. "I guess when you see a lot of people treating others like they're nothing, it's easy to build a wall of ice around your heart to protect yourself. But the problem with ice is that it stops you from feeling the cold, but it also stops you from feeling the warmth." James nodded, the truth of her words hitting him deeply. He leaned in a little, his voice low and confessional. "Recently," he said, "I spent some time being someone else, someone with nothing, and I discovered that to most of the world I was invisible. It was the first time I felt the cold you're talking about firsthand." Julia didn't show any surprise. She just watched him with a new depth in her eyes, giving a slow nod. "So, you know what it's like," she said softly, "to be a ghost that people walk through. Few men in your world allow themselves to feel that. That is not a weakness, James. It's a strength." In that moment, something shifted. Her validation, the respect in her voice instead of pity, was the healing he didn't even know he needed. For the first time, he wasn't Mr. Alistair, the millionaire, nor Leo, the victim. He was just James, A man with his scars, being seen by Julia, a woman with hers. Two people, finding common ground in the universal language of vulnerability. When the rain stopped and the coffee was finished, they said goodbye on the now glistening sidewalk. As James walked away, a single, powerful realization hit him. He had spent a fortune trying to buy a perfect connection that turned out to be a fraud, and the first genuine connection he'd found in a decade cost him only the price of 2 coffees. The months that followed were a rediscovery. James's life found a new rhythm in the quiet of his conversations with Julia. With her, he learned that intimacy wasn't built at expensive dinners, but in the safety of being yourself. One evening, he invited her to the Sterling. "There's a place I need to revisit," he said, "but this time, the right way." As they entered, he asked for a quiet table in a corner. The air between them was filled with the warmth of soft laughter, and they rewrote the memory of that place, replacing the poison with healing. At the end of the dinner, James took her hand. His voice was thick with an emotion he no longer hid. "Julia," he began, "for years, I lived in a cold world. You were the first person who looked not at what I had, but at what I was feeling. You reminded me what it's like to be seen as a person." He then took out a small, polished wooden box. Inside, a ring with a unique, irregularly shaped sapphire. "I had another ring?" he confessed. "It was perfect, flawless, and it was a lie. But this ring, this one is real. It's imperfect. It has character. Just like you. Just like what I feel for you." Tears welled in Julia's eyes as he knelt, indifferent to the other diners. "Julia, you taught me what true wealth is. Will you marry this imperfect real man?" The yes seemed certain, the perfect conclusion, but it didn't come. Julia's smile trembled, and the tears that fell were now of anguish. "James, please get up," she whispered, her voice broken. Confused, he stood, the ring still extended between them. "I can't say yes," she continued, each word a torture. "Not before I tell you the truth, the whole truth." James's heart went cold. "I didn't meet you by accident, James. My name isn't just Julia. My name is Julia Andrade." The surname struck him like lightning. Andrade. Andrade Textiles. The hostile takeover from years ago. A ruthless deal that built part of his empire on the ruins of another man's family. "My father, he lost everything," she said, the pain of a lifetime in her voice. "I came to your company with a plan for revenge. I was going to get close to you, find a secret, anything to tarnish the Alistair name, to make you feel some of the pain my family felt." He stared at her, the ring forgotten in his hand. The world around them disappeared. "But the plan failed," she sobbed, her face awash in tears. "I saw you. I saw your loneliness. I saw the man behind the name. I saw what you did to find the truth, disguising yourself as Leo. And I fell in love with the man who was willing to break himself to find himself. The man I wanted to destroy became the man I love. And that is my prison," she finished, the confession hanging in the air between them, more devastating than any photograph, more cutting than any of Claire's lies. James stood in silence, his face an impenetrable mask of shock and pain. The woman he saw as his beacon of authenticity, his salvation, was the architect of a lie far deeper than he could ever have imagined. The imperfect ring, a symbol of real love, now seemed like the symbol of a beautiful, tragic fraud. And the question hanging in the air was no longer whether she would accept him. It was whether he could ever forgive her. James doesn't remember how he left the restaurant. The next hour was a vacuum, a blur of wet streets and city lights. He found himself back in his penthouse. Silence once again, his only companion. On the coffee table, the small wooden box remained closed, a time bomb containing a now-tainted promise. The first wave of emotion was a bitter fury. Had he been a fool twice? Had he traded one liar for another, more skilled one? Cynicism, his old familiar shield, began to form around his heart again. The urge to shut down, to raise the walls of ice Julia had warned him against, was almost irresistible. He stood and walked to the enormous window, the same one where Julia had found him in his pain. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass, but the face staring back wasn't that of a betrayed man. It was the face of Leo. And then the mirror formed. He remembered the scratchy polyester, the invisibility, the humiliation. He remembered the deception he himself had engineered, the web of lies he had woven to capture a truth. He had deceived to expose a lie. Julia had deceived to seek justice for a pain he could barely imagine. Her lie was not born of greed, but of grief. He thought of Claire, whose deception was empty, a means to a material end. And he thought of Julia, whose deception was a weapon forged in the fire of her family's ruin, a weapon she herself had lowered when she saw the humanity in her enemy. One of them had stabbed him in the back while smiling. The other had confessed her crime at the moment of greatest vulnerability, choosing the truth even if it cost her everything. In that moment, James's transformation was complete. Forgiving Julia wasn't an act of weakness or foolishness. It was the final proof of his own redemption. It was the only way to prove he truly understood that people are more than their worst mistakes. It was the only way not to freeze on the inside. He found her sitting on a bench in a small park near her apartment. The night was cold, and she looked small and fragile, waiting for the verdict. He sat down beside her, the silence stretching between them. "My father taught me that in business. You never show weakness," James said, his voice calm. "He broke your father. I built an empire on that philosophy, and it almost broke me." He turned to her. "Your lie almost broke me again tonight, Julia. But your truth, the courage you had to tell me everything, knowing you could lose me, that is the most valuable thing anyone has ever offered me." He took the small wooden box from his pocket and opened it. The imperfect sapphire glowed softly in the park light. "Our beginning wasn't a love story. It was a story of pain. Yours and mine," he said. "But maybe real love isn't about finding someone perfect. Maybe it's about finding someone whose scars fit with your own." He held the ring out to her. "I don't love the lie you told, Julia. I love the woman who had the courage to tell me the truth. Do you still want to build a true story with me, starting now?" With a sob that was both pain and relief, Julia nodded, holding out her hand. And as he placed the imperfect ring on her finger, James understood the final moral of his journey. True wealth wasn't having someone who never lied. It was having someone who, in the end, chose the truth, no matter the cost.